1999. Dagestan, the height of combat operations. A Russian tank moves into position when several grenadiers open fire on it simultaneously. The first hit shakes the hull. The crew inside feels a powerful impact, but the machine continues to move. A second hit, a third, a fourth. Grenade after grenade strikes the sides and the turret, but the tank does not stop. A fifth, sixth, and seventh hit. And this machine is still on the move, still firing, still in the fight. 7 direct hits from rocket-propelled anti-tank grenade launchers, and not one of them was able to put the tank out of action. This tank was the T-90, a machine that, after this battle, began to be called one of the most resilient and dangerous tanks on the planet. But even such a monster had a weak spot, and it was found not on the battlefield, but in an office at the West Point Military Academy, 1,000 kilometers from Russia. However, let us take everything in order. To understand why the T-90 became a true revolution in tank building, one must go back and understand how the world of armored fighting vehicles is organized. From the moment the first tanks appeared in the trenches of the First World War, armored vehicles were divided into 4 main classes. Heavy tanks carried the maximum amount of armor, turning into slow but almost invulnerable fortresses on tracks. Super heavy tanks went even further. Monstrous firepower was added to the thick armor, but the price for this was enormous mass and extremely low mobility. Light tanks sacrificed both armor and armament for the sake of speed and maneuverability, which made them ideal for reconnaissance and quick raids. And between these extremes existed medium tanks, a compromise in all parameters. Machines without a clearly defined specialization, but capable of performing a wide range of tasks on the battlefield. This system seemed logical and established until 1945, when the British presented the Centurion tank to the world. It was this machine that became the first main battle tank in history, denoted in the West by the acronym MBT. The idea was daring and simple at the same time. Why make 4 different types of tanks if you can create one that combines the best qualities of each? Thanks to the development of engines and the appearance of composite armor, engineers were able to cram the firepower of a heavy tank and the protection of a super heavy tank into the hull of a medium one, while maintaining the mobility of a light one. By the 1960s, main battle tanks had almost completely displaced all other classes of armored vehicles from the armies of the world's leading powers. The Soviet Union was not just keeping up in this race, it was setting the pace. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Army had 3 families of main battle tanks in service at once: the T-64, T-72, and T-80. Each of them was a formidable machine, but such variety created a serious headache for military logisticians. 3 different tanks meant 3 different sets of spare parts, 3 different crew training programs, and 3 different supply lines. In the conditions of the Cold War, when the Soviet Union was preparing for a possible large-scale clash with NATO forces, this was an impermissible luxury. The military leadership needed one tank capable of replacing all 3 and, at the same time, surpassing each of them in the aggregate of characteristics. In 1986, the Design Bureau of the Nizhny Tagil Uralvagonzavod received an assignment that determined the future of Russian tank building for decades to come. Engineers were to create a fundamentally new machine, using the T-72 platform as a base. The choice of this specific model was not accidental. The T-72 was distinguished by its relative simplicity of design and low production cost compared to the more complex and expensive T-64 and T-80. But the simplicity of the base did not mean that the new tank would be a cheap imitation. The designers intended to pack it with the most advanced systems of armament, protection, and fire control that the Soviet defense industry could offer. Work proceeded rapidly, and already in January 1989, the first 4 prototypes of the new machine were handed over to the military for testing. The tank was driven across testing grounds and checked in the harshest conditions, and the results were impressive. In June 1990, the military received an improved version, which took into account the observations identified during the first tests. Serial production began in 1992, already in the new Russia. Thus was born the T-90, a tank destined to become one of the most recognizable and formidable symbols of Russian military power. A machine that would be simultaneously respected and feared around the world. By the time it was adopted for service, the T-90 was no longer just another tank in a long line of Soviet armored vehicles. It was a machine designed with one goal, to destroy everything that appeared before it on the battlefield. And the main tool of this destruction was a gun that at a single glance made it clear why this tank made generals on both sides of the Atlantic nervous. The primary armament of the T-90 is the two A-46M 125mm smoothbore gun. This gun represents a deep modernization of the Sprut anti-tank gun, and its capabilities go far beyond those of a conventional tank gun. The fact is that the two A-46M is capable of firing several types of ammunition at once, which makes the T-90 a universal weapon against practically any enemy. Armor-piercing fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds are intended for fighting enemy armored vehicles. At enormous speed, a tungsten or uranium core pierces even the thickest armor. High explosive fragmentation shells work against infantry, fortifications, and lightly armored vehicles, covering the target with a hail of red-hot fragments. But the most interesting part is the reflex-guided anti-tank missiles, which are fired directly from the barrel of the same gun. These missiles are capable of hitting an armored target at a distance of up to 5 kilometers with exceptional accuracy, which turns the T-90 not just into a tank, but effectively into a self-propelled anti-tank missile system. However, even the most powerful gun is useless if it has to be loaded manually under enemy fire. In most Western tanks, such as the American Abrams, the crew includes a separate loader, a fourth team member who manually loads the shells into the breech of the gun. Soviet designers went a different way, and this path turned out to be both brilliant and frightening. The T-90 is equipped with an autoloader that holds 22 ready-to-fire shells in a special carousel located under the turret. This mechanism is capable of feeding a shell and loading the gun in 5 to 8 seconds, which is comparable to the speed of a well-trained loader, but with one important difference. The autoloader does not get tired, does not panic under fire, and does not lose speed after the 10th or 20th shot. Thanks to the autoloader, the T-90 crew consists of only 3 people: the commander, the gunner, and the driver. This means a smaller internal volume of the tank, and therefore a smaller silhouette and a smaller target for the enemy. The fire control system deserves a separate discussion because it is what turns the T-90 from just a powerful gun into a high-precision weapon. The automated sighting system allows the gunner to detect and hit heavily armored targets at distances of up to 5 kilometers. On the T-90A modification, the T-01K05 Buran M Gunner's sighting complex is installed, providing a maximum observation range of 1,800 meters in night conditions. During the day, the crew is capable of detecting and tracking a target at a significantly greater distance, which gives a colossal advantage. The ability to see first and fire first. And in war, this often means the difference between life and death. In addition to the main gun, a remotely controlled cord anti-aircraft heavy machine gun is installed on the turret roof. This weapon is intended for fighting aerial targets, but works no less effectively against ground targets, light armored vehicles, manpower, and firing points. The effective firing range of the cord is 2 kilometers, and the rate of fire reaches 600 to 650 rounds per minute. A critically important detail is that the machine gun is controlled remotely. The tank commander does not need to lean out of the hatch, exposing himself to sniper fire or fragments, to conduct anti-aircraft fire. He does this from under the protection of armor, observing the situation through optical instruments. All this firepower is driven by a diesel engine with a capacity of 1,000 horsepower. It might seem that the figure is not the most impressive compared to the 1,500 horsepower gas turbine engine of the American Abrams, but the diesel has its own trumps. It is significantly more economical, easier to maintain in field conditions, and not so finicky about fuel quality. On the highway, the T90 accelerates to 60 kilometers per hour, and over cross-country terrain, it confidently holds 45. For a machine with a combat mass of about 47 tons, these are excellent indicators that provide the tank with high operational mobility in any theater of military operations. But firepower and mobility are only two-thirds of the formula determining the effectiveness of a battle tank. The third component, without which everything else does not matter, is protection. And it is here that the T90 prepared the most interesting surprises, which are worth talking about separately and in detail. Any tank, no matter how powerful its armament, remains just a pile of expensive metal if it is not capable of protecting its crew from enemy fire. The designers of the T90 understood this better than anyone else and built a protection system that works not in one, but in 3 echelons at once, each of which is designed for its own type of threat. It was this multi-layered defense that turned the T90 into a machine that many military experts around the world considered practically invulnerable. The first echelon is the main composite armor of the hull and turret. Unlike the tanks of the Second World War, where protection was provided simply by thick sheets of rolled steel armor, modern tanks use so-called multi-layered composite protection. The principle of its operation is based on the alternation of layers of various materials: steel, aluminum, ceramics, and special plastics. Each of these materials reacts differently to the impact of a shell or a cumulative jet, and together they dampen the impact energy significantly more effectively than any of them individually. A cumulative jet, which easily burns through a homogeneous steel plate, gets bogged down and dissipates as it passes through layers of different density and hardness. An armor-piercing core, capable of piercing steel at enormous speed, loses stability and deviates from its trajectory upon collision with ceramic inserts. The frontal projection of the turret and hull, where the majority of hits occur in real combat, is protected particularly seriously. The equivalent of this armor in terms of ordinary steel amounts to hundreds of millimeters. But Soviet engineers understood perfectly well that even the best passive armor has its limit. Anti-tank means are constantly improving, and sooner or later a shell will appear capable of piercing any, even the thickest, stationary protection. Therefore, on top of the composite armor, the T90 received a second echelon of defense, the Contact 5 Explosive Reactive Armor Complex. Special containers are placed all over the hull and turret of the tank, inside which are metal plates with a layer of explosive. When a cumulative jet or an armor-piercing core pierces the outer wall of the container, the explosive detonates and the metal plates fly toward the threat at enormous speed. This counter-impact literally cuts the cumulative jet, depriving it of its penetrative capability, and the armor-piercing core deviates and loses a significant part of its kinetic energy. Contact 5 became one of the first explosive reactive armor complexes in the world, effective not only against cumulative munitions, but also against armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot rounds, which are considered the main weapon of tanks against tanks. However, the most technologically advanced element of the T90's protection became the third echelon, the Stora 1 electro-optical countermeasure system. And it was this complex that gave the tank its most recognizable feature: 2 bright red lights on the sides of the gun, for which the T90 received the nickname Red Eyes. These red lights are infrared jammer searchlights, and their task is to blind the homing heads of anti-tank guided missiles that use semi-automatic command to line-of-sight guidance. Simply put, when an enemy operator aims a missile at the tank, holding the aiming mark on the target, the Stora's infrared searchlights create a powerful flux of radiation that confuses the missile's guidance system, forcing it to deviate from its course and miss. But Stora 1 is not just red eyes. The complex includes 4 laser warning sensors that instantly detect the illumination of the tank by a laser beam. When an enemy gunner takes aim at the T-90 using a laser rangefinder or target designator, the sensors record this and immediately notify the crew. The system automatically determines the direction from which the illumination is coming and allows the crew to turn the turret with its frontal armor toward the threat, exposing the most protected part of the tank to the blow. Simultaneously, aerosol grenades are automatically fired from 2 blocks of 3D6 smoke grenade launchers installed on the sides of the turret. A dense curtain of aerosol smoke hides the tank not only in the visible range, but also in the infrared, making it invisible to thermal imagers and laser guidance systems. All this is controlled by the onboard computer, which processes data from the sensors and coordinates the operation of all elements of the complex in fractions of a second without crew participation. It was the combination of these 3 echelons of protection that made possible that legendary battle in Dagestan when the T-90 withstood 7 direct hits from grenade launchers and remained in service. The reactive armor dampened the cumulative jets. The composite armor stopped what passed through the contact, and the crew remained alive and continued to fight. After this incident, the tank began to rapidly gain a reputation as an indestructible machine, and this reputation very soon attracted attention far beyond Russia's borders. The fame of the T-90 quickly spread across the world, and the first country to take a serious interest in this machine was India. By the early 2000s, the Indian Army already had licensed production of the T-72 at its factories, and was well acquainted with the Soviet school of tank building. When the Indian military saw what the successor to the platform they knew had become, the decision was made quickly. In 2001, India signed a massive contract for the acquisition of a large batch of T-90S, which received the designation T-90S in the export version. Indian generals expected that since their factories were already producing the T-72 and the new tank was built on the same base, the re-equipment of production lines would proceed without serious difficulties. The first batch of 42 machines delivered to India represented a transitional model. These tanks still had the old V-84 engines and cast turrets inherited from the previous generation. A cast turret is a single piece cast from steel in a special mold, a reliable technology refined over decades, but having its limitations in terms of shape and wall thickness. However, the next batch of 80 tanks differed strikingly from the first. These machines received fundamentally new welded turrets, which were assembled from individual armor plates, allowing for more precise control over the thickness and tilt angles of the armor in each specific zone. In addition to the turrets, the power unit was also updated. Instead of the old engine, the tanks received the modernized V92S2, which added 160 horsepower above the previous power. This increase might seem insignificant on paper, but for a tank operating in the conditions of the hot Indian climate, where engines work at their limit due to high temperatures, the additional horsepower meant noticeably better dynamics and a margin of reliability. The Indian contract became a turning point not only for the export prospects of the T-90, but also for the Russian army itself. When the leadership of the Russian Ministry of Defense saw what kind of machine the Indian military was receiving, a curious situation occurred. The export version of the tank turned out to be more advanced than the one in service with their own army. Russian generals quickly appreciated the advantage of the modernized version and decided to use the export configuration as a base. Thus appeared the T-90A modification, which incorporated all the improvements developed for foreign customers and added a number of its own innovations. The T-90A received the same powerful engines that were supplied to India, new welded turrets of improved geometry, and also the modernized Buran Gunners sighting complex, which significantly increased firing capabilities in the dark. In addition, the machine was fitted with an updated Contact 5 explosive reactive armor kit, providing more reliable coverage of the hull and turret projections. This modification was officially adopted for service and became the main version of the T-90 in the Russian Army, remaining in service from 2004 to 2016, when it began to be replaced by the even more advanced T-90M modification. By this point, the T-90 had firmly taken its place in the elite of world tank building. Military analysts and specialized publications around the world regularly compiled rankings of the most powerful and dangerous tanks on the planet, and the Russian machine was invariably in the top lines of these lists. The main competitors of the T-90 were considered the American M1A2 Abrams and the German Leopard 2. Each of these tanks represented its own design school and its own philosophy of conducting tank warfare. The Abrams relied on the most powerful frontal armor with uranium inserts and a gas turbine engine of colossal power, but paid for it with an enormous mass of over 60 tons and the gluttony of a power plant that required a continuous supply of fuel. The Leopard 2 was famous for its magnificent optics, refined ergonomics, and the highest firing accuracy on the move, but it was also distinguished by its impressive mass and cost. Against the background of both Western competitors, the T-90 looked completely different. With a combat mass of less than 50 tons, it was significantly lighter and more compact, which gave it an advantage in logistics, transport, and operations on bridges and roads with limited load-carrying capacity. At the same time, its firepower and protection system were not inferior to Western analogs, and in a number of parameters, in particular the presence of the Stora-1 active protection complex, the T-90 had no analogs among mass-produced tanks. However, it was precisely the Stora system, which was considered the impenetrable shield of the T-90, that attracted the close attention of people whose profession was to find weak spots in others' defenses. And they found this weakness not on a testing ground or in a secret laboratory, but within the walls of one of the most prestigious military educational institutions in the United States. In March 2020, an article with the concise and alarming title, "On Destroying Tanks," appeared on the official website of the Modern War Institute at the West Point Academy. The site itself is accompanied by a standard disclaimer stating that the published materials reflect the personal opinions of the authors and are not the official position of the Military Academy, the Department of the Army, or the United States Department of Defense. But despite this formal disclaimer, the content of the article was so specific and detailed that any competent military specialist could extract from it a ready-made instruction for action. The authors of the article claim to have found a critical vulnerability in the protection system that many considered the main trump card of Russian tank building. It was specifically about the Stora-1 complex and how it could be deceived with the help of the American FGM-148 Javelin man-portable anti-tank missile complex. To understand the essence of this vulnerability, one must understand exactly how the Javelin works and how it differs fundamentally from most other anti-tank missiles. Traditional anti-tank guided missiles fly toward the target in a straight line or a flat trajectory, and the operator must hold the aiming mark on the tank throughout the entire flight of the missile. It was specifically against this method of guidance that the Stora was designed. Its laser sensors detect illumination, infrared searchlights disrupt guidance, smoke grenades set a curtain, and the missile goes wide of the target. The Javelin works completely differently. The operator points the sight at the target. The system captures the thermal image of the tank, after which the missile is fired and acts completely autonomously without any participation from the operator. The shooter can change position or take cover immediately after launch. The missile will find its own way to the target. But the main feature of the Javelin lies in its flight trajectory. The missile does not fly directly into the tank. After launch, it sharply gains altitude, rising to 150 or more meters, and then dives onto the target from above almost vertically. And here lies the key moment. The turret roof and the upper part of the hull are the least protected zones of any tank, including the T-90. The main composite armor and reactive armor blocks are concentrated on the frontal and side projections because that is where the vast majority of threats come from in a classic tank battle. From above, however, the tank is protected much more weakly, and that is exactly where the Javelin strikes. Moreover, each Javelin missile is equipped with a tandem warhead consisting of 2 cumulative charges. The first leading charge is intended to detonate the reactive armor block and clear the path for the main one. The second main charge, significantly more powerful, strikes the already exposed composite armor and burns right through it. Thus, even those few elements of reactive armor located on the turret roof do not save it from the Javelin. The tandem warhead sequentially overcomes both levels of protection. But the authors of the West Point article went even further. They described a specific tactical technique that allows for the complete exclusion of the Stora 1 complex's activation. Its essence is extremely simple and elegant. The operator of a Javelin equipped with the improved ITAS sighting system aims the missile not at the tank itself, but at a patch of ground approximately 3 hull lengths in front of it. Since the aiming mark is not directed at the tank, the Stora's laser sensors do not record illumination. Infrared searchlights do not turn on, and smoke grenades are not fired. The protection complex simply does not know that a missile has already been launched at the tank. And when the Javelin gains altitude and enters a dive, its homing head independently captures the thermal image of the tank and corrects its trajectory, directing the missile exactly into the turret roof. The T-90 crew only finds out about the attack at the moment of impact, when it is already too late to do anything. The simplicity of using the Javelin became another factor that multiplied the threat to armored vehicles. Unlike many complex anti-tank systems that require lengthy operator training, the Javelin is designed so that a soldier with a minimum level of training is capable of handling it. The fire-and-forget principle makes this weapon accessible to practically any infantryman, turning every soldier with a Javelin on his shoulder into a deadly threat to the most modern tank. The response of the Russian military-industrial complex to this threat was the new generation T-14 tank on the Armata platform. This machine, for the first time in world practice, received an unmanned turret and a fully isolated armored capsule for the crew, as well as the Afghanit Active Protection Complex, capable of intercepting incoming shells and missiles even on the approach to the tank, including those attacking from above. The first experimental batch of 100 machines was declared for production, and the whole world froze in anticipation of the answer to the question that haunts military analysts in both hemispheres. Will the Armata be able to close that very vulnerability found within the walls of West Point? Or are engineers on the other side of the ocean already working on a new way to deceive even this protection?